Some churches spend tens of thousands of dollars every year going on 1 to 2 week mission trips overseas. Some churches don't focus on missions at all. That's why today we're talking about the efficacy of short-term mission trips for the American church. What's up, everybody? My name is Derry.
And my name is Ethan. This is the Things You Don't Hear in Church podcast. We exist to answer the hard questions of the Christian faith, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Instagram, not so much on TikTok anymore. And also we have a Patreon. If you guys have a spare few dollars a month and you want to support the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. And yeah, like Derry said, we're talking about short-term missions. So both of us have experience in the missions world. I've been on 7 short-term trips, so I think I have hopefully a little bit of authority on this subject. Derry's been on a number of them as well, but also has done the same ministry when we were in Hawaii for many years. So also got to see the fruit of doing the same type of ministry for a long period of time, and the benefits of being consistent in one area. So it'll be a good conversation between long-term, short-term missions. Who is it good for? Because it's got to have some good, right? I think it does.
Sure.
And so, yeah, Derry, let's get into it. Take it away.
Yeah, now that both me and Ethan are no longer in YWAM, we can share all the dirty secrets.
It's almost like an obligatory. It's like we left YWAM, now we have to talk about short-term missions.
Yeah. So to define short-term missions for everybody right at the beginning, I really like the YWAM definition of it. Short-term missions is anything under 2 years, okay? And of course, there's going to be different levels of effectiveness within like the spectrum of what could really be short-term and what a church could actually do. And so we're going to try to speak to a few of those things. I don't think we're really going to cover like a 1 year long trip because there's just so much different stuff in there and we don't have the time maybe, but we'll go over like the really short ones that most churches do, like 1 to 3 weeks, and then a few months we'll go over as well with different categories. But Ethan, have you ever done like a really short-term mission trip with a church like a couple weeks before, or has it mostly just been with YWAM?
Yeah, no, the first time I ever did anything in missions was in YWAM. I was like,
well,
people came here and they're like, what's your experience? I was like, I don't have any. I became a Christian like seriously like 2 years ago and got a job. Like never went on a week-long trip. I went to churches that did week-long trips. My older brother did a week-long trip to New York. So that'll be interesting too with when we talk about like location-wise, like if we're talking about short-term, is it better to go overseas or go somewhere in your own nation? Would be a good topic, side quest in that. So yeah, no short-term 1 to 2 weeks, just bare minimum 2.5 months.
Yeah. Growing up, I did go on one, and then our church did things called prayer tours, where it wasn't really a missions trip. It was like a planting trip for different churches. So we would just go to a city and pray and do evangelism over that city, basically. So those were cool, but not really a missions trip necessarily. But I did go on one mission trip, which was very transformative for me growing up. I think I went when I was 14. The first place I ever preached, the first place I think I really ever did serious evangelism or like prayed for people. And so I definitely wasn't ready. And I probably should have done all of those things before I went. But it was a good experience, and I got to know like what missions was about. I got to see a different culture that I wasn't used to. And so I learned a lot through it. I don't really remember if people were impacted that much, but I definitely grew. So that was cool. I'm sure people were blessed. I don't know. But it was a cool trip, and I made some friends too that I still have today. So that was pretty cool. To give this podcast a little more of a framework for people listening, what we're not talking about today is if short-term missions is biblical, okay? Because the disciples went on short-term missions. They went on long-term missions. Like, as a Christian, your job is to be on mission. Now, there's a difference between missions and being on mission, of course, but every Christian is supposed to live a life that is doing ministering to people about Christ. So it's everybody's job, but there is a difference between like the long-term and the short-term missions, and we want to talk about if they're beneficial, okay? So the sort of the critique I hear most either pastors or scholars or lay people talk about when they talk about sort of the I think it's mostly a non-denom thing, but maybe it's also a general Protestant thing to go on these short-term missions where usually in the summer, usually involves some youth, could be just the general church too, people that want to go. will get together to go on a usually 10-day to 3-week kind of trip. I feel like that's usually like the range most people go in. Sometimes they're shorter too if it's close by. For example, I live in California, and a lot of churches here will go down to Mexico to build houses for a weekend. So it's a little different, right? Like there's a practical goal, and it's 2 days, and you're going to build a house. I think the question most people have, though, that don't like them is they'll say, well, it's kind of like tourism, and like you're going to like paint a house and like tell a couple people about God. Like you could have like saved probably like the $3,000 per person. So maybe 30 grand or something. You could have saved that and just sent it to the church there. Like 30 grand is life changing for
or like the
people in the country you went to.
Or life changing for the people in the country, life changing for maybe people struggling in the church that you're a part of. You know, different situations. Yeah, it's really funny because there's like the one I do have like memories of it. One of my friends went on, and they went for 10 days South Africa. It was like $3,000 or $4,000, whatever. And a couple years later, we were talking, and they were saying like, they're like, we stayed at a resort and did like tourism things, and then did a couple things at like an orphanage, and they were like, it was really less missions and more just like a fun trip that we did good things on. She was kind of disappointed about it.
Vacationary.
Yeah, they were kind of they kind of felt like I wanted to go do real work, and like it didn't work out. And I'm not saying that to blanket every American church. That's just like the one experience that the one person my friendship and my friend group went on had. And I got back from YWAM, and I was like, wait, $3,000 for 10 days? I was like, bro, we spent like I think it was $1,900 was grounds fees and flight. So about $3,000 for 3 months, and there's 12 of us.
Yep.
I was like, bro, put me in charge. Like, make me a missions pastor. I will
literally
make this like very cheap outreach. Like 10 days, bro. We're going to take up a whole hostel for 10 days. And then guess what? It's $3 a bed. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And then guess what? Food, $5 a day. Transportation, $5 a day. I just got your whole... And then you're going to do evangelism to tourists. How about that? Or like backpackers
it's
and
not
work
hard.
with the church.
Yeah.
I just planned your whole trip. It's like...
it's really not hard.
That's going to be like... Like, oh, we're doing this outreach into Thailand for 10 days. Why don't you guys come out? It's only going to be $2,000. It's only going to be $1,500, and $1,000, that's the flight.
Yeah.
It's like, I think there could be more efficacy, like more efficient ways to do it. But we'll get into all that later.
Sure. So I think that's most people's critiques of these like shorter term missions trips. There's more critiques we're going to go over, but we want to talk about if they should be a thing at all, right? Mm-hmm. Do the critiques warrant not doing them and not going anymore? Do they cause more good than maybe possible harms they could cause too? We're going to talk about it. It'll be fun. But first, I kind of want to start with like 1 to 3 week mission trips, because they're going to be different between that and like going for a month to a few months to even a year or longer, right? So in going through that, we have to go through the purpose of missions and what we're doing on the missions trip, right? So I think there are very different models even of what your church wants to do in their mission trip. Are they going to do evangelism the whole time? Is the place they're going to like even equipped for that? Like, are there translators, or are you going to a place where people speak English and even are going to contextually understand the gospel? Or are you going to a place that it's going to be otherworldly to them? Like, you're going to India and they're just going to accept it as another religion, and you're going to have a translator. And there's going to be no way for you to really contextualize the gospel in that short amount of time. Like, is that going to be effective? We're going to go through all that kind of stuff. It'll be fun. But 1 to 3 weeks first. And I kind of want to go over like the pros, I guess. Like, what are the pros of going on like a 1 to 3 week trip for the people going and for the individuals you're going to? Can you think of any, Ethan, like right off the bat? Of like, if you are a pastor and you're taking your youth group or your congregation on one of these trips.
At the very least, the benefit of any amount of cross-cultural missions, whether a week or a couple months, I think is that the person going gets to a lot more of the experience of seeing the world, right? And I think that's good for the individual, right? I think, like, I am of the opinion that everyone should do a YWAM DTS, because at the very least you experience a whole different culture. You may have great memories, great friends, and a lot of your worldview's challenged. I remember we went to with the first trip I was on, we went to the slums in the Philippines, and we were supposed to do ministry there and share the gospel. And a lot of the village apparently was Christian or just like nominal Christians. But we would ask like, hey, is there anything that we can pray with you for? We were like hanging out, and so many people were living in the slums in like maybe multiple people in the size of the room I'm in right now, which is not very big, made of bamboo, right? One bucket to shower in, one bucket to wash dishes in. And they're like, no, we're blessed. Like, we don't need to ask God for anything. Like, we just feel so fortunate with what we have, and we just feel so loved by Him, and we're incredibly blessed by God. So yeah, we're good on prayer requests, and they were just happy. And I remember just thinking like, wow, I suck. Like, I conflate like happiness with materialism so much, and I was just like, so I almost was like crying on the way back because I was just like, oh my gosh, like my whole worldview is off and wrong. Like, there's deep happiness and joy people have with far less that I am missing out on, and I'm the one that needs prayer. I was like, wow. And so for that type of recognition and humility, everyone should go on a trip like that. You have to make it strategic because there are ways that a short-term trip can hurt people, right? We went to like a house to where like little girls who had a rough life would live, and if it was dangerous at home, right, they went to go live there. And some of these girls were crying by the time we left, saying like, please come back, like don't leave. And it was like so sad. And I'm just like, maybe don't do that type of work. Now that trip I was on where that happened, I was just like learning. I was a student, and so I was just like going along with it. But I was like, man, that was hard. That was like, I don't ever want to be in a position again where people are going to be grieved that we don't come back and we can't make a lasting impact. So I think if you're doing short-term stuff, evangelism or practical service to churches, and evangelism in connection with a local church, where you can be like, hey, if you got saved or you want to know more about this, here's some people we've been working with. They would love to take you on, right? That would be the best way. So partnership with a church, evangelism that the church is okay with you doing, and practical service. I was just talking to the friend that we made when we were in Thailand years ago. Me and you here met you, and he's down in Bangkok now. He's been in Thailand for 10 years, dude. Has like 2 kids, 3 kids, I think, and is church planting, doing a great job. And he was saying that he just had a team actually from Honolulu come and stay with him, and they just helped him. I think they were rolling out grass and planting grass for his backyard, and like, wow, just doing tons of practical service. And he was just like, man, he's like, that blessed us so much. He's like, that was so helpful. Helped me get like weeks ahead of like what I need to do, and it cleared up my schedule so he can do more ministry. So that's like really great ways to do it, right? You learn to get outside yourself, you learn to serve others, and you get to see another cultural experience that challenges your worldview, and it sticks with you, man. Some of the things I've learned that they stick with you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think a lot of the pros can come from very effective planning, right? A lot of that effective planning will come from, in my opinion, having a long-term view of the short-term trip to the place that you're going to. So if your church has a connection, like if we started a church and we had a connection to Ewan in Thailand, right? And we were like, hey, every summer we're coming back to you, and we're investing in you, and like we're coming to bring maybe even an offering to help you out, but we're also going to come and give you physical labor, evangelism, teaching your church, take some of the load from you. That some of the pros that come from that is relieving some of the work that he has to do, because a lot of people could go on these trips and be a burden to the place that they're going to, and you don't want to do that, right? So you can go to give them some kind of a relief, some kind of a break, and even boost their ministry, maybe get new congregants for their church, do evangelism, maybe even open their eyes and give them a fresh like boost of energy that they didn't have before. But I do think that most of the pros that come from a 1 to 3 week trip are honestly for the participants, because for an individual that has never been overseas before, or maybe in the context of doing ministry, right, there is so much culture shock that happens at the beginning of that trip, which is pretty much all you have if you're going for like 10 days to 3 weeks or whatever, right? that's pretty much all you have. Like you can kind of settle in at the end a little bit, but like it's a different language, it's a different culture, there's different food. You're probably getting sick at least once during your time there, or at least starting to get sick, right? You're getting overwhelmed. You don't have the routine and the normalcy of your everyday life. You're probably worried about being culturally offensive everywhere you go and saying, doing the wrong thing, pointing your feet in the wrong direction. Like you can be so easily culturally offensive to people. And you're also thinking about like, how can I be effective? How could I bring something that these people will value? How can I contextualize the gospel in a good way? And so much of the pros come from the individual experiencing the culture and getting to see a different way that people worship, different people engage with God, different way that they can understand the gospel, right? Like what is valuable in their culture about the gospel, because it's different in different cultures because they value things a little bit differently. So the individual getting to maybe do evangelism for the first time, preach for the first time, you probably should have done it before you went. Like my kind of motto, I think, if I ever like was a pastor and I was taking people on trips, was the first time you do evangelism can't be when you're on the trip. Like if you're not doing evangelism here, what makes you think you're going to do a good job doing it overseas, where it's even harder to do it, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're not willing to tell your friend about the gospel in America, you're not going to do a good job telling a stranger in Thailand about the gospel. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I've thought a lot about... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, that'd probably be a prerequisite for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've thought a lot about, like, if I was on staff at a church and I was getting a group ready to go overseas, I would want to have, like, hey, here's the cutoff day. If you want to go on this trip, the cutoff day is this day, and then we have a couple months till the trip. And the reason we have the cutoff day that is then is because twice a week or every week, we're going to be doing evangelism together. We're going to be praying for the nation together weeks, months in advance before we go. You're not just like showing up on this day, hopping on a plane and going to another country and having fun. You're here to like learn how to share the gospel. We're going to do it. We're going to go downtown and do it. We're going to go pray for people in public. We're going to maybe do some open air preaching in the nation that we exist in and get over those nerves. So when you're over there, it'll be better. And then what people will find will probably be like it's super hard in your own nation, but when you go overseas and you're unique because you don't belong in that culture, people are more likely to listen to you because they're confused. Like, why are you here,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Which is sad. It's like you have more confidence sharing the gospel here because people are... Or I say here because I'm in Thailand, but like, overseas because people are like, oh, like, yeah, what are you saying?
Sure.
Yeah, so I think that's a great idea, though. Like, one of our friends who went overseas to Malaysia for a few years, she came back and she told us, like, who you are here is who you are there. You're not going to get overseas and become this super evangelist if you're not an evangelist here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not going to be, like, any different. Like, you're still the same person. So, and I think that's really good to have that prerequisite. Like, you can't, like, it's almost like you have to protect the mission. You want the church to go on the mission trips to expose them to missions so they'll go long term, at least like a percentage of them, but you have to protect it so there's a high standard when you go and it's respectable.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think, in my opinion, you can disagree with me. I honestly think the main goal realistically for a missions trip is, one, that the participants will be exposed to missions so that they could possibly go back or get a heart or a calling for missions. They get a taste of it, see what it's really like, and believe in themselves, believe in what God could call them to do, and see that it's possible. Like, you don't have to have a big word from the Lord to go to missions. You can see the need and go fill it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think, in my opinion, that's like not the best thing that can happen, because the best thing that can happen would be someone getting saved. But like, that's the most realistic goal. Right?
Yeah.
And then my second best goal that can happen is we evangelize and someone gets saved. Like, my main goal in going is, I know we're going for 10 days, right? I know we're not going to do a great job contextualizing the gospel. We may not, all the participants may not even get a chance to do that. Maybe we only have one translator, right? And maybe only like me or a couple or another person's going to be able to share the gospel effectively. And who knows if that person gets saved, right? So my expectation is, I want these students, these participants, to have this experience where they get exposed to missions and they possibly get called by God to do it. And I also want them to share the gospel. That's kind of in my mind, like, what the main goals are. Do you think that's wrong, or would you say there's something different?
I think that's great. I even wonder sometimes, like, if you're trying to get your congregation to be more into missions, it is really hard for the translation side of things. I've even wondered that with some YWAM stuff, is like, because I was running an evangelism school when we were there, I was wondering like, should we just go to another part of America? If the goal of the school is to like train evangelism, like the best way to do it is be like go to a place where people speak your language. So maybe you can go to like Europe. I know Europe is like very post-Christian, and so there's a lot of evangelism that could be done there. There are places where people speak a good amount of English, so that's comforting, you know. A lot of tourist cities, a lot of people will speak English. You just got to find it. So that's the thing, right? If you're going to do evangelism and you're like, let's find people who speak English, you do have to be okay with being like, hey, do you speak English? And then saying no, like, and doing that 20 times until you get someone who speaks English. You know, and sometimes God just brings them to you. There's been like 2 trips I've been on, one in Cambodia, one in the Middle East, where I just was walking around. I think I was like ordering food, and we met this one guy. At least in Cambodia, I was ordering food with my co-leader, and we met this guy, and he spoke English like fluently. He was an English teacher. He was Cambodian, I think. And we shared the gospel with him, and he wanted to get saved, and we plugged him in with the YWAM group there. And I was like, this is like the easiest thing in the world. What just happened? That's crazy. Yeah. And then again, in the Middle East, I went to a Christmas service at an Anglican church. Some guys sat behind me, and we started chatting up. They spoke English, and so we started chatting. And they're like, "Oh yeah, we're not Christians. We got invited by the guy who was leading worship." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, cool!" Like, and it was like he was friends with our contact, so it was cool. And we got to hang out with them for the whole time we were there. And at the end, one of them got saved, and they were plugged into the church. Like they came to church with us. The church members knew them. They had their phone numbers. They would text them separately than us, and so at least I think that's the case. But I knew the church had separate relationship outside of us to these people, and knew them and had been working on ministry with them too. And so it was like super cool. I was like, wow, this is beautiful and amazing that this is like continuing. And like, yeah, it just happens that the Lord brings people who are ready and speak English. And so there is an element of maybe faith with that. But yeah, you have to be strategic because translators also can be expensive. You know, like they can be like multiple hundreds of dollars just for 10 days.
Yeah. That's why I think it's so important. The planning process, like you said, like if your goal is to evangelize and that's the number one thing you want to get out of it, you need to go to a place that just mainly speaks English. Because if you have like a 14-year-old that's going with you, like good luck getting them articulating the gospel in the first place. If they're super cool and they're able to do it, like good luck getting them to be able to do that with a translator and finding somebody. It's just another layer of difficulty, and having them be the one with one of the translators you have. If you have 10 people and 3 translators, like just good luck. You know what I mean? There's gonna be so much more barrier to entry than if you go to somewhere maybe in Latin America where people speak English a little more, right? Or something like that. So you have to realize that that's your goal, then where you're going to strategically. But if your goal is like, hey, I want to expose these students to just the most different culture they could be a part of so they could see like and gain all of this knowledge and worldview and understanding from a different culture about Christianity, then you can go somewhere else, and that's your main goal. And hopefully people get saved. You're going to share the gospel. That's still going to be a main goal of yours. But you're going realizing you want people to get caught on fire for missions and go back, right? So I think that is for sure one of the main goals and one of the biggest pros to like those shorter term trips. Is there any other pros you can think of, or should we go to cons?
No, I think that's good because it really is about the person going, unfortunately. Like everyone going is like, I'm going to serve the people. But it's like, yeah, but this is going to serve you infinitely far more for the rest of your life than the person you evangelize to. Like the person you evangelize to, if they don't get saved, they might forget you in 3 weeks and be like, oh yeah, that one American came and talked to me about their God and that was weird. But for you, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, like I am capable. I really love that country. I know people who went on like a week-long trip to Mexico and then they're like, I'm going long-term. And they are still there years later, right? And so that's the hope, pretty cool, is that people go, get exposed, get convicted, get called, and make a decision. You know, I think maybe we disagree on the do you need a calling aspect, because I used to say you don't need a calling. If you have passion, go. But every long-term missionary I talk to says if you don't have a calling, you will leave when it gets hard. There's times we want to leave and we go back and we look at what we believe God told us to do. We realize we're called and we stay because even though it's hard and it can suck us sometimes. And so many people have told us like, please don't come here unless you have a calling. Like, unless you know, don't come here because we don't want you flaking out after you've been involved in ministry. So, oh wow,
Sure.
that adds so much more light. I wish I could keep that door open. The background just lit up so beautifully. But yeah, so I think I used to say all the time, yeah, like you don't need a calling, just if you have a passion, go. But in like the last like year, I've changed my mind where I'm like, nah, like if the people who are out here doing it are telling me, please come with a calling, then maybe I should set people up well to say, yeah, go with a calling.
Sure. I just think everybody's called. So
The overseas missions.
yeah.
Oh wow, I don't think that. I think not everyone's called to overseas missions.
Yeah. Different perspective. We can talk about it another time. Unless you want to talk about it now, we can, I guess.
I don't know if there's any like specific Bible verse that lends itself either way. I think everyone's called to share the gospel and evangelize, and of everyone doing that, people will get a heart and calling and plucked out by God to go do that overseas.
Yeah. I just don't think I think we have a lot more free will than we actually do. And if you read in scripture that we're supposed to evangelize the world and you see a place that you want to go to and share it, you could go for 2 years. You could go for the rest of your life. You go for 2 weeks. You could go. Like,
yeah, I
you
think,
see that
okay,
it's good,
yeah. So what I mean by don't go unless you have a calling is I don't mean don't do any form of missions. Like, I think if you're like, oh, I really love Thailand, I want to go there, and like I went there on a week-long trip and I want to go back and spend like 6 months there and serve, totally, like, I'm not a problem. I'm talking about like the long-term, like I'm moving here, my whole life's here. Like the people who spend decades there will be the ones who have the calling. But maybe there's also, maybe that's just the experience of the people I met. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a number of missionaries who are like, I just love it in Malaysia, so I came here. This place is awesome.
I mean, I've heard lots of stories, like the Nehemiah House guy and lady. Like, they just see a need, and they're like, wow, like, Jesus cares about this place. Like, we need to come back and fill this.
Well, he was called,
like,
though.
Christians need
he had
to be
an
here.
actual angel come to him and give
That's
him
true.
a leaf.
That's true. That's very true. But I just don't think there's anything wrong with someone being like, wow, like, that place has a lot of orphans. I could go over there and start an orphanage and then doing it.
Yeah,
I think it's a very biblical thing to do.
Yeah, I wouldn't discourage
And maybe
anyone from doing that.
You could argue they're going to leave. Maybe they will. I don't know.
Yeah. I wouldn't
think it's a bad
discourage someone from doing that. I would just, the biggest thing is that people go out of excitement and think that they like, I love it, it's so exciting. And then after like 3 months, the real, or 3 to 6 months, the real culture shock hits them and they will leave. Right. And so because we've seen people get overwhelmed and leave and ultimately hurting the current people there, that's why I'm hesitant to say, oh yeah, if you just love it, just go. I'm like, you should maybe experiment with it. Say, hey, I really love this country. I want to be here for 6 months. Like a 6 months commitment.
Yeah.
And then if you love it there, like, okay, let me do another 6 months. But don't just go from after 1 week and say, I'm going to live here. But again, that's what my one friend in Mexico did, and he's been there for years. So, there's always the exception.
Use wisdom, probably. But cons of the short-term mission trip, the 1 to 3 week mission trips, I think number one, just on my side, is cost inefficiency. Like, you're spending so much money. The things you're actually getting out of it are, I mean, you're hoping mostly, right? And the people you're going to probably aren't being helped that much from 10 days, right? Like, it would be hard to argue that they're being helped more than $30,000 would help them. You know what I mean? Because you're going to go, most of the time if you're taking a youth group, you're painting a house or building something, and then you're leaving. Like, you could send them $30,000 and they could build their own house and have money left over.
Multiple houses.
You know what I mean? Or that could pay their salary for a while and they could be freed up to do more ministry or something. Who knows? Like, there's just so much that can happen. Now, of course, if God calls you to do something, you should do it. So I'm not saying that it's bad to go on missions if God's called you to do it, but there is a very real aspect of cost and efficiency with these short-term trips.
That's what I'm saying, man. You and I could both be as like missions pastors and just do excel. Like, I always go back and forth on how I feel about being a pastor, but whenever it comes to like working with a church and running a missions program, I'm like, that's what I feel like I could be effective at. Like, I could like we don't need $10,000 or this many $1,000. Like, let's make it, like, how sick would it be, dude, if you had a program where every year during the summer between semesters, you took a group of college kids or kids going from high school, like a little, instead of working a job before college, spend 3 months overseas, and you just take the kids 3 months overseas, and like, you could spend weeks before that as like in the springtime getting them ready for that. Or maybe like learning.
So just work for YWAM for 6 months of the year.
No. I want to get paid. I want to get paid. So I can't work for YWAM.
Some other cons that we've kind of talked about a little bit are like the tourism mindset. Like there's so much of a mission trip that's like we all have matching neon shirts and we're all going
People
to
do
another
that?
country. Oh yeah.
Oh, that's so cringy.
You gotta get the
dude.
picture with
Oh
the
my
matching
gosh.
shirts.
That's so
and
cringy.
You're overseas altogether. It's not cringy for like, I don't know, for non-denoms. It's just like kind of a typical non-denom thing to do.
It's just like going to Cedar
they make
Point
shirts
with
for
matching
things.
Cedar. It's like going to an amusement
Yeah.
park with matching shirts. It's like any
Yeah,
family
yeah,
that does that. I'm like, are you guys homeschooled? Like, what are you doing?
It is a little bit like those vibes.
Hilarious.
So I think there can be some of that. Like some people 100% are going and maybe won't have this as like their final experience, but are going because they're like, oh, I've never been to Thailand before. That sounds cool. I want to eat pad thai and I'm going to go and maybe I'll share the gospel with someone.
Dude, pad
And,
thai
like,
is just the
that's
tip
kind
of the
of their mindset.
iceberg.
Dude, it is. Pad CU is the only thing you
Dude.
really need though.
What is it?
Pad CU is the only thing you really need.
Okay, I'll have to
though.
get that. We've had khao soy,
I eat that every day.
curry, different types of
Calzo's
curry.
good, yeah. Ooh.
Mango sticky rice.
I'm getting hungry now.
More than you can imagine.
Mango
I'm about to
sticky
go
rice
get
is
some right. I'll send you a picture. I'm like, look at all this. Dude, the other day we went to this random shop on the side of the road and they had a duck rice dish for like I think $1.50 and it was so good. I
Wow.
got 2 of them. And they brought it was
Nice.
it was phenomenal. You guys got to come to Thailand. It's-
Okay, I have 2 more points for the cons. I think there could be not enough time for you to culturally assimilate to a place, meaning learn the context of the place you're going to, like by physically being in it. There's one thing of like reading about it, but like actually being in it and seeing how you can effectively share the gospel is 2 different things, 2 very different things. It's hard to even do that on a 3-month trip. So that can be a very big hurdle. You could plan around that and sort of get rid of it through planning, but it's very hard, and most churches don't do that. It's just hard to commit to that much learning. And lastly, I think I have heard from a lot of contacts overseas and from books that a lot of short-term teams do a lot more harm than good, from being very offensive culturally to being a burden to their hosts. And just because when you're there, like your host basically has to babysit you, especially if you're going to a place that doesn't speak English. They have to be your 24/7 like nanny and walk you around and drive you around and feed you and translate for you. And that's a big
Yeah, it's
burden.
exhausting.
Everything they had to do that week or maybe 2 weeks, they no longer can do, and it's pushed to the next 2 weeks. And now they have to work doubly as hard for 2 extra weeks. And so it can be a burden if not planned for correctly. Not saying every trip does that, but it is a possibility, right? So it is possible to be culturally offensive, to be a burden to your host. And there's just so many people that don't plan correctly. Like I remember there was, I don't know if this is an SOME speaker or who it was, but one of the speakers one time was telling a story about these like huge business dudes that was working with a church, and they were super into missions. And they're like, let's go to this place in Africa. Let's get them water. This like one place they were like working with. Let's get them clean water. And they went and they like did a scouting trip, and they're like, they can't do laundry. They have to go to this river and walk like miles to get water to do laundry, to like do their laundry in the river. So let's cut that out and let's get them washing machines. So they bought them a whole bunch of washing machines and they installed them. Went there on a trip, did all the manual labor and installed them like near the village. And they go back a year later and they haven't touched the laundry machines. And they're like, why aren't you guys using these? And they're like, we don't have any water to run through the laundry machines to do our laundry. And so they literally just didn't think ahead. And there's just so much that happens in short-term missions because there's usually one person running it. And it's really hard for them to get all the details down. They're trying to train everybody, think ahead. What are we going to do? How are we going to be effective? And just things like that fall through the cracks at times. It can add to the hindrance of the cost and effectiveness and just the hindrance to the culture when you go and do that kind of stuff and you don't plan ahead very well.
Well, similarly too in Mexico, our contact there who builds the houses, they had one team who came to build houses from a church in America, and in Mexico, most of the bathrooms are outside the house, like behind the house, and they're like, oh, like we don't want them to have to walk through the mud if it's raining or walk outside. Let's put the bathroom inside and serve this family. And sure enough, a year later, they came back and they were using the bathroom that's inside the house as a closet, and they put a bathroom outside. And they're like, why are you doing this? And they're like, because in our culture, our bathrooms are outside. Why would I? Why, like, this is just what we do in Mexico. Like, I'm not going to have where I use the bathroom right next to where I sleep. That's gross. So it's outside. And so it's just like, they didn't know. They thought, and like, you know, you could say like, oh, but the church was like trying to help and they're trying to do good. It's like, yeah, but like, I don't think it's like, that's not, it's understandable, but it's almost not excusable. Like, you don't get to be like, oh, my ignorance doesn't matter because my heart's good. It's like, no, it does matter. So there is, that's why you said, like, I like what you said earlier, where there's partnership, right? And ideally someone, and ideally maybe you take a small team first. Maybe like a missions pastor and like 2 others go on a scouting trip. Like, if I was in it and I'm like, hey, Ewan, or like people in the Middle East, I know we want to work with you. We'd love to partner. We would like to, I'd like to bring me, my wife, and a few others and do a scouting trip just to see what the strategy could be, and what's the best way to serve you. Can we do that? Come and then see, like, yeah, okay. And then have maybe a strict guidelines. Like, we don't want to have to pull you guys away from your work. So is there things we can do where we can be maybe independent? And that's what we did when we were there in the Middle East. It was like, yeah, you can go to these places and do evangelism. That's fine. You can't try to, it's illegal to proselytize anyone 20 years and under. So, you know, maybe don't make it obvious that's what you're doing. If they ask you your story, you can say that. But what's really helpful is working with like programs that are established, like an English speaking program. Because you say, oh, because everyone's going to ask, why are you in my country? And it's a lie to say, oh, I'm just on tour, just traveling around. Like right now, I can say that because I am. I'm just traveling around Southeast Asia. No problem. I'm just a tourist. I can say that. But if my mission, if the only reason I'm there is because I want to share the gospel, it's kind of a lie to say, oh, I'm traveling around. It's like, no, you're not. So we would work with like an English program, and it's like, oh yeah, we're helping out this English program where it's a conversational. And if you want to, and we invite people who are, it's like conversational English. We play games, you know, whatever, and that's great. And people be like, oh, cool, that's awesome. Like, and there's no problem saying you're a Christian. Like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, and my church partners with this other church here to do English. We speak English. They will have an English program. We come out here and help. That's acceptable. It's totally fine. And they gave us like they gave us like all the reins for that. They're like, I think they literally gave us the keys to the building. They're like, here you go. Just on Wednesday nights, show up, do this. Yeah, it was great.
That's cool.
Yeah, so we're like, sweet. And so that was a really effective way to do it. And also members from the church were there who spoke English and knew the culture of the church and were able to like kind of help us like, oh, hey, don't do this, or hey, do this instead. But it was really cool. So yeah, I guess you would have to, like it's all about planning. It's about strategy. Some people maybe unintentionally might have some arrogance thinking like, oh, we want, like we were talking about, like, oh, we want to put a bathroom in here. We want to like bring washing machines. It's like, it's a good heart, but it's unfortunately arrogant because it's like you are assuming you know better, right? And you're not coming as a learner. And that's why I said you want to take that first trip with a small team to then communicate like, hey, what can we do? We want to make sure we're being like really helpful. How can we actually do this and make it make the most of it, right? And then come back, give a report, and then assemble a team that can help with that. And then maybe people in the church will be like, oh, but we could also do this. We could also do that. It's like, yeah, but we want to do only what our contacts asked us to do because we want to help them.
Right.
There's another church I know about that would try to, like, right before the school year, collect all these like school utensils for kids in Uganda and send them to kids in Uganda. And I was talking to someone who did a number of trips to Uganda, like in partnership with us, and he was like, dude, he's like, the church should not be sending these backpacks with notebooks and pens and pads, and like they don't care. Like we get there and we give them the backpacks and they immediately take the backpacks and cut them up and turn them into shoes. Like they have no need for backpacks. Like everyone's sending them this stuff. There's like other more important needs that are there. And I was like, wow, like that's really, like that's something like no one in the congregation knows that. They're like, oh yeah, I'm helping out, I'm doing something good. And it's good. Like I know, like in their heart of hearts, they're trying to serve the Lord. So I'm sure God sees it. But it's like there's got to be some more communication between so that we can make sure we're helping correctly.
Absolutely. So on average, would you say that these like 1 to 3 week trips are beneficial or not?
I think you can make them beneficial. I think it's a give and take. If you set correct expectations and you plan correctly, they can be beneficial. I think oftentimes, as far as I've heard, they're probably not as beneficial as they could be.
Sure. I would say I would agree. I think most of the time they're not worth doing, but you can make them worth doing, right? By having adequate planning and having, like, these are the two biggest things. Having adequate planning, I guess three maybe. Adequate planning, having good expectations and goals of like what you want to do while you're there. Balloons again for everyone watching. And then lastly, having a contact you're going to that you can speak to and be like, hey, what do you need, right? Because I know for a fact that there are contacts out there that would be like, don't send me 10 high schoolers. Yeah. I don't want that, and that will not be helpful.
Send me 3 strong adults who can build a house. Something like that.
Yeah. Or like send me a few people who can really know how to share the gospel, right? And can do stuff on their own that I don't have to babysit. Because I have this ministry I'm running or something, right? Or they can teach at my church or equip and could teach a class on how to study the Bible. That could mentor some of my young leaders or something, right? Like there are things that they could actually want and need. And you could send a focused team, right? Like maybe you don't need just 10 random individuals. Maybe you need like a couple of the pastors to go and equip them, right?
Or like,
but hey.
Oh man, go ahead. I'm just getting passionate.
Yeah, but then there also is the aspect of like, we do want to expose the whole church to what missions is and getting a chance to going and serving in some way. So you need to go to a place that's going to be accepting of that and that's going to be effective. Maybe a place where they can speak English or a place that's not too expensive, so the cost, is effective there, and a place where you're not going to be a hindrance and the culture isn't going to be that hard to assimilate to, stuff like that. That's going to be a good experience for the people, and they're going to be like, whoa, I could actually do missions. I could do this, right? What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, if a pastors were trying to take a trip together, they could do something kind of how like the BCC does, where they go and train pastors in another country. So you could work with their contact and say, hey, like, go to the Philippines. Be like, hey, we are 3 or 4 pastors from a couple different churches around the area. We want to make sure we're like we've just been like kind of convicted by the Lord to do more mission stuff. Is there any way that we could help you? And you should not say we would like to come train your pastors. That would be that'd be like pretty arrogant, right? Gotta have
that's what they need, right?
Yeah. Now if they're like, you could say, here's our skills. We've all been in pastoral ministry this long. We've trained pastors for this many years. This is our skill set. And if they say, okay, cool, we can use that. There's a number of young Christian pastors here who need some guidance. Great, awesome. And then, but the pastors should recognize then, like, hey, just so you know, those pastors in that other country are going to be relying on you for the following couple of years and messaging on WhatsApp and Facebook because they have questions, right? So if you can't be just here for 3 weeks and leave. You got to be down for the long term and be willing to answer questions and still be on phone calls, possibly. Not saying it's going to happen, but it's likely. But then just thinking, what I would say is like, the church does need to do missions better because technically YWAM shouldn't exist. And technically World Race shouldn't exist.
Yes.
Because the biblical picture of missions is that a local church raises up a missionary and sends them somewhere, and the local church supports them and takes care of all their needs. A really good image of this is there's a church in Boston that sent the first missionary to Hawaii. I think it's Park Street Church. And even to this day, we went there, me and Spencer went there a couple years ago. So as far as 2023, the most recent update I have of them, they have a missions department at their church. That's like a couple people are on staff, but like their whole job is just to network with fundraisers to support the missionaries. Yeah. And the missionaries from that church, they're like, hey, don't worry about fundraising at all. We're gonna take care of it for you. We'll send you this money. And like they probably have some agreement with the church, like, hey, because of where you're living, this is how and your need. Like if you're a single person living in Thailand, you're probably fine with like $1,000 a month. But if you're like a missionary to Dubai and you have a family, you probably need like close to $200,000 a year to be a successful missionary, right? And so maybe the church would take care of that. They'd say, hey, we're gonna raise the money, we're gonna send you where we're partnered with, and you don't have to worry about it at all. Because then it's like you're on staff. You're basically like a paid position as a church staff. And so I think that is the most biblical picture of how to do missions. And I think the Lord has raised up other missions organizations, maybe because there's been a vacuum and God wants to reach the world. Or you could also say like, well, the Big C church is supposed to do missions, so these organizations are not unbiblical because the Big C church is still doing it. But I don't know if that's how far that goes. I think that's being a little bit too much.
Sure. If I had a church, I think the model that I would run for these short-term trips is one, like I say, which we're just starting the department, right? One, we pray and ask God, where do you want us to focus? What are the gifts and the things you've given to our church that we can partner with the nations? And then if he gives you a nation, search in that nation for some kind of partnership. You can do a lot of research. You can have a lot of video calls online. It's really easy to do. Once you narrow it down, find a place, you can go there and you establish a relationship, right? You can go there and meet the person, see their ministry, something like that, right? And once you find someone to partner with, you can take teams there and provide the needs that they communicate to you that they need, right? And as you do that, the goal is to be a blessing to them, but also to see the congregation grow in evangelism and teaching and understanding cross-cultural missions and hopefully getting inspired to go there or somewhere else, right? So that at some point in the future, you could send people from your congregation there to live short or long term. That would be kind of the vision or the goal that I would see in starting some kind of mission department in your church and having it be effective.
And I do know there are organizations that are great. There's one called Send based out of Michigan. And we actually just met the director of Thailand here at a church for Send. It was crazy. Like my wife knows someone he works with, basically. I was like, wow, what a small world. We just went to, we were like, we haven't been to church in a while. Let's go. And we found an English-speaking church, met this guy. It's great. But they have really cool programs where you can do like 3 week long. They're like, 3 weeks in, I don't know, this random country, and you are a barista. And so you serve at a Christian cafe, a barista, and they post the needs they have, basically. And they're like, there's a 3 week commitment.
Oh, interesting.
And so like, here's a 3 week commitment. We need someone to be a barista. So you know what you're going to do. You show up, there's already people who are long-termers asking for your help to come, right? So you already know. Or it's like, hey, we need English speakers to run an English camp for 2 weeks for kids in this country. Yeah. Or they have longer programs where they're like, oh, you want to serve for 6 months, you can do this. Or you want to maybe serve, I think this would be right, but maybe like 9 months as an English teacher in this country during the school year. So it's like stuff like that where they kind of have their needs set up and people can pick and choose how they want to help. So there are cool programs out there like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Ending the episode, because we've been going for almost 50 minutes, do you think there's any difference in a little bit longer of a term trip that's still short term, like 1 to 3 months? Is there any differences in the pros and cons?
Yeah.
Those kind of things.
For 1 to 3 months, I'll speak out as far as like the 3 month, the 2.5 to 3 months, because that's most of my experience. You kind of get to a point where you're there long enough where you can set up a type of rhythm, right? You can make it so, I work out on this day. This is the time I eat at this place. You also are there long enough to recognize the symptoms of culture shock and respond appropriately. Even coming here on this trip, I realized, I'm like, oh, wow. That first week in Vietnam, I was culture shocked and I didn't realize it. I was just like, and I realized looking back, I'm like, wow, I think I was culture shocked a lot more on the outreaches I did than I ever thought. Like looking back on like the things that stressed me out when I was on previous trips, I was like, wow, wish I would have known that when I was there, but good to know now, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it gives you enough time to like feel the culture shock, recognize it, and then respond appropriately. Gives you enough time if you're there for 3 months. If you meet someone the first month, you can have 2 months to keep hanging out with them, right? It gives you a great amount of time to experience the culture. You can actually like feel it. I don't know if you really experience the culture so much in a week, especially if you're in a more touristy area. And yeah, just greater opportunity for more ministry, depending on the need, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I do think the longer the better.
It also gives people a lot more of a vision of what it could be like living there, because you have so much more time to just wander, experience, like adventure, and that's going to be a lot of what living there long term is going to be, right? You're going to have free time. You're going to be able to actually live there like you live here.
Yeah.
And, where the place you live, you have things you like to go do. You wander, you explore, you understand the culture, and you're going to do the same thing there. And so you get to experience a little bit more of that. Also, cost effective wise, like the cost of a 3 week trip is basically the same as a 3 month trip.
I know.
Like for most places that are pretty cheap,
ridiculous.
It's basically the same.
It's ridiculous. With the amount of money that they charge, I'm like, please, I'm almost like, please hire me to be a missions pastor. I will, like, you'll be so happy with how much money you save. And the thing is, if you make the cost lower, more people are likely to go on it. So imagine if you had like every year, like, hey, a summer of missions in like your young adults group or whatever. It's like, I don't know how big, and you have like 5 teams of 5 people, and like maybe 1 leader per, or maybe 2 leaders per. So it's like 7 people teams. going out, that'd be great. And everyone's like, yeah, it's pretty affordable actually. Yeah. And if it's actually super affordable, it'd be really cool if it would ever be possible for the church to just pay for it. Like, hey, sign up if you're serious. You'll pay grounds fees, but we'll cover flights. You know, something like that. That'd be super cool.
No matter what, it'd still be the same people giving because they'd give the same tithes anyway, but whatever.
Whoa, what?
Like the people would still be covering the cost because they're the ones tithing, and that's the money the church has anyway. So it'd kind of be the same.
The churches, the mission trips I know about, the church doesn't cover anything.
No, I know. But I'm saying if they did, it would be the same money that would come from people donating anyway.
Oh, yeah. I think, yeah. Like whether like we take an offering gift to them or not, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is cool.
I agree with you about the 3-month ones though.
Yeah. And it'd be so cool if like just, hey, or even if you did 2 months, if you're at a church, like, hey, if you're this summer, we have like this many weeks. So this third of the summer, we're spending learning how to do evangelism. We're doing it. We're sharing the gospel. You can make it super focused because then you can know, if we're going to be in the Philippines for a month and a half and we're going to be doing this ministry specifically, now we can train for that ministry specifically.
Right.
And so you could just make it super cool. It could be like a missions internship almost. And then the people who go through it can then following year lead a trip, right? And again, you just keep it low cost, and you make it. Maybe you can help. There's so many things you can do to help them. Like, hey, if you can save this much a year, you can go on the trip. Like that, you could just break it down because a lot of people need financial planning help. But that's such a side tangent. But it's just like there's so many ways we could do it. And then if people are likely to go on multiple few months trips, they're more probably likely to go long term. But there is when I was talking to Ewan, he said that there was one guy he knew who would receive YWAM teams, and he would always challenge them. Like he'd see the same leaders year after year, or every 6 months he'd see the same leaders. So he'd say, hey, when are you going to stop flirting with missions and make a commitment? You know, like you keep coming here on all these short-term trips. Are you you're going to make a decision? And I'm like, that's so good. Because
People say that all the time.
I like it. And the thing is, I think you also got to know what your calling is. I think for a long time, I was like, am I called long-term? And I think in the last year, my wife and I have realized like right now we don't feel called long term. And it's like I used to feel bad, like, I should care more. I should be called long term. I should want to go overseas. But like we've just been like, I can't help but shake that it's not the time. Now it could be. Like I've been wondering the whole time we've been overseas, we're here in Asia. And the only time I ever traveled the world beforehand was for missions. So this is the first time I'm doing it for fun. And it's like, wow, like what is it? Are we supposed to live here? And it's just like, everything just feels like, you're supposed to be in the Midwest right now. And it's like, okay, the Lord ever wants us to go, he can let us know. But I think, it's
cool.
Good to get clarity on what it is. But I don't think it'd be super cool if you could do like every year, 3 months trips. And you had different contacts. You could send like 5 people teams. Oh my gosh. And then the reports would be sick, dude. You just have like you could have like a whole conference when they return about like a gospel conference, right? Gospel con. And it's like, here's what, or Great Commission Con or whatever, and like all the teams report back, and it's a weekend long thing of like all this stuff that happens, and then it gets the church even more stoked next year, and then you get people, and then you can be like, okay, as a church we're going to be praying for these nations and then you have like, oh man, there's just so much you can do. Wow.
Yeah,
that'd be sick.
I think that's all I have to say on the topic. Anything else you want to add?
Nope, just another that's sick.
That's sick.
Said it so many times.
Well, guys, thanks so much for listening. If you're a pastor and you want to challenge us on any of our beliefs or things we said today, we'd love to hear it in the comments, or you can send us a DM or call us or tell it to us in person if you know us in person. Maybe not Ethan because he's overseas, but for me, you can.
Or come overseas and talk to me in person. That'd be crazy.
Yeah, if this reshapes your vision of what missions is, that'd be cool too. Leave us a comment and let us know. And thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next week, hopefully. Shoots.
Peace.